Haiti, interestingly enough, after this, they became only the second independent nation in the Western Hemisphere. There were two. Which two were they? I gave you one. Anybody know what the other one was? The United States. Those were the only two independent nations. One slavery and the other one an all-black nation. Kind of an interesting thing. I just kind of want to give you each a little bit of a... Sorry, I keep going this way. I usually have a little podium up here that I'd like to work with. At least put my notes on it. 1793, the Fugitive Slave Laws. Okay, this was one of these things. Remember we talked about states' rights? Do states have rights? Are they independent states? The Civil War wasn't caused because of states' rights. People will tell you that. Oh, it was a states' rights issue. No, it was an economic issue. It was strictly economics, no matter what anybody tells you. And here's one of the violations of a states' rights issue. It's called the Fugitive Slave Act. If, in fact, we were all individual states, and if the North became free territory, which it did, and I can't tell you that it was always altruistic, slavery just didn't work in the North because you had to feed slaves year-round, but because of winters, you couldn't have them work year-round. And then there were a lot of people that did not like slavery at all. So the Southerners could grow their cotton and their tobacco and their indigo year-round. So at any rate, what this said is that slave owners or their agents had the right to search for escaped slaves in free states. This becomes the basis of the Dred Scott decision a little bit later. And there were severe penalties. You could go to jail if you actually hid a slave. And you could be fined up to $500 if you hid a slave. And so when we talk about slaves' rights, if a slave moved, say, from Mississippi to Illinois, a free state, is it my responsibility to try to find the guy in the South who the slave ran away from? And if I say, no, it's not my responsibility, that I'm going to be fined and possibly put in jail. So you see, this was not a states' rights issue, or slaves could have escaped to the free states. It gets worse from there. Missouri Compromise. I'll try to move this through a little faster now. It's really interesting history, but we'll move this faster. As the United States grew, and we need to think about the House of Representatives in the United States Senate. Senators, there's 2 per state, and that creates a balance. So when suddenly you have the North or the South has one more state than the North, they have 2 more senators than the other side on the slave issue. So as one state came in, another one, if a slave stayed in, we wanted a free state. In Missouri, they had a doctrine that was called popular sovereignty, at least they were playing like it was, where they let the state decide whether they wanted to be a free state or a slave state. Now remember, the population at this time was not great. So there were 1,500 people registered to vote. 1,500 registered to vote as to whether it was going to be a free state or a slave state. 6,000 people voted, and it became a slave state. And part of that compromise is that we brought in the state of Maine as a free state, so that we had the requisite number of senators. Now remember, because of the 3/5 vote, the South had more representation than they should have had, because the slaves had no representation. They couldn't vote. They weren't citizens. They couldn't. So now remember this. This is really the important catch here. When there's a tie in the Senate, who gets to break the tie? Anybody? Russell? Vice President. The Vice President of the United States. And if you think about our early presidents, where did most of them come from? The South. As a matter of fact, out of our first, I believe it was 17 presidents, about 14 of them owned slaves. Kind of an interesting number. Then you had, many of you heard the story of Nate Turner. He was a black slave, and he started trying to get some black folks organized to see if they could free themselves. Well, not only was he caught and killed, and 56 other people with him, black folks were hung, and I might add, without a real jury. They had commissions in those days, and the rules of evidence were not such that. But because the white people were so incensed that they killed another 200 black people by mobs. So, I said, I'm sorry, I got to do this. I'd have this stuff here. Now we're going to talk about one of my favorite things, the Underground Railroad. How many of you heard of the Underground Railroad? Was it Southern Pacific, Santa Fe? What was it? Anybody know? New York Central? The Chinese? The Underground Railroad was neither underground nor was it a railroad. But it was a pathway that runaway slaves could take to get to the north. And as a matter of fact, because of the Fugitive Slave Act, a lot of them kept going north till they got to Canada. Now, Canada had been a British protectorate like the United States. But guess what? During this time, Great Britain abolished slavery. And in 1908, the United States officially, and it's in the Constitution, folks, you probably never read it, it's in there, stopped the slave trade. Officially stopped the slave trade. Now, why don't you see that in the Constitution? 1808. The reason you don't see it in there, it's in there, but the word slavery never appears once in the United States of America's Constitution. By design, it was never put in there. These are the compromises that these people had to make America a country. Good or bad, and Franklin was a firm believer, and he told Jefferson and Madison, who were pretty upset over this, he said, we put that phrase in that Constitution that we can amend it. And that's the power that we have in that document. If it's not correct, we can correct it. So the Underground Railroad gave birth to somebody that many of you have heard of, the general public has never heard of, and it has created a firestorm just recently, and that was Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman was a black woman, not a real educated black woman. She had her front teeth knocked out, so she wasn't a real glamorous gal. She kind of looked, like she wasn't well educated in that, and she probably wasn't, but her heart was in the right place. Harriet Tubman led people. She ran away. She was a runaway slave. She went to the South on 19 separate occasions to bring out other black people. She was noted for either carrying a rifle or carrying a pistol with her for her defense. There's more to that story than meets the eye. Harriet Tubman also carried that gun to stop slaves that had a second thought about going back south, because this was a secret location of places where slaves could hide during the day and move at night. And I'm going to tell you a quick story. When I was a teenager, my grandparents moved to southern Illinois. And one time we were going down there, and there was a house, or a road map here. It said, visit the slave house. And I thought, no, I didn't have slaves. That was part of the Underground Railroad. They actually had a house that black people would go to, and there were secret panels in the house. So they'd sneak up there at night, and then they'd hide during the day, and then at night they'd come out and keep moving north. It was an exciting part of history. I don't know if it's still there. I'm old, so it probably fell down by now. But it was really an interesting thing to see. So we got Harriet Tubman is being discussed to be put on the $20 bill. Now, who's on the $20 bill? Anybody know? Randy Jackson? Okay. At least you know that. It's interesting that most of us love Andrew Jackson. He was an American hero. Andrew Jackson became one of the presidents of the United States. He was a banking expert. He had different views on banking that had been done at that time. He was a slaveholder and very pro-slavery and fought to have slavery expanded into the western United States. Can you believe that? And now we're talking about Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman was a spy during the Civil War for the Union Army. Harriet Tubman was a Republican. She was a Republican. Now, I'm not much of an activist to saying who belongs on our money. But really, if we're principled Republicans, why would we want a guy on our money that promoted the expansion of slavery as opposed to a woman who is in fact going out there during her life trying to help slaves to freedom? Interesting. Okay, I'm going to cut a lot of this stuff out here and try to go to some really important things because I know it's getting late. You don't want to hear everything I have. I want to take us to 1855 and 56. Any Republicans out here know what that year meant? Say what? Okay. What was it that was so important in 1856 in Ripon, Wisconsin? It was the beginning of the Republican Party. And guess what? I guess today we'd call it a platform. Guess what that platform was in 1856? Anybody know what the cause was? Why it was formed? The abolition of slavery. Now, I might ask the question, radical Republicans, I may ask this question of you. Why is it that a majority of blacks are Democrats today to a party? Andrew Jackson was a Democrat. He's considered to be the founder of the modern-day Democrat Party. He appointed the judges on the Tanner Court, which was the one that had dealt with the Dred Scott decision. And we'll get there in just a moment. But the Republican Party platform was to abolish slavery. Yes. Oh, yeah. I'll get to that. So then we're going to move up to 1858. And this is a really interesting case. Perhaps Russell knows the details of this. It's the weirdest doggone thing you ever heard, the way this case went down. First of all, Dred Scott was a slave. He was a slave to a military person. And at that time, it was all United States. This country hadn't split yet. But it was a southerner. He moved to Wisconsin, or to Illinois. Now, Illinois is a free state. Now, we agree that if you're a free state, you can't have slaves. But if a person brings a slave to a free state, is the slave free or is he still a slave? And if he is still a slave, then does that make a free state a slave state? And that's the question that was before the court. Do you all understand that question? Okay. He later moved to Wisconsin, which at that time was a territory of the United States, and it was a free territory of the United States. The Army officer then moved back to Missouri, which was a slave state. So all this time that Dred Scott spent on free territory, he was still a slave, and he moved to a slave state. Now, he got the message after he should have. He should have sued immediately when he got to Illinois. But how can you sue if you're not a citizen of the United States? And the courts won't recognize you. Remember when I said earlier on, the things that you couldn't do? You couldn't go to court. Well, he went to court in the state of Missouri anyway. They recognized the case, and they said, yes, Mr. Scott, you are free. So Dred Scott was a free man. Well, I'll say it, Democrats didn't like that. Because the Republicans, the rascally Republicans, are pushing for freedom for him, and the Democrats couldn't stand that. So they took the case to the Supreme Court of Missouri, who said, no, Mr. Scott, you are a slave. I remember something about double jeopardy somewhere, but it wasn't the game on TV. So he was tried again, and then he became a slave again. So they went through up to the Supreme Court. Interesting. There were 9 judges. 6 of them were slaveholding judges, including Taney, who was the man. 3 of them were northern judges. Most of them put on there by none other than Andrew Jackson was the one who nominated him. Now remember, Andrew Jackson is a fierce supporter of slavery and its expansion. So what he did, Taney looked at this and he said, we don't have jurisdiction over this because this man is not a citizen of the United States, 1. 2, he's property. Now think back to the Bill of Rights. Article 5 of the Bill of Rights talks about property and what you have to do with property, how you can dispose of property. And he said, but that does not apply in this case. And then he went 2 steps further. 1, he said that when the framers wrote the Declaration of Independence, they did not mean that blacks were equal to whites, that they were a subsection or subhuman people. He didn't use those exact words. Those are mine. That was the gist of it. And then he said that the United States Congress had no jurisdiction over whether a territory or a state could come in free or slave. Now, as Russell will clearly agree with me, that was probably not the first, but that was an activist court. They sent Dred Scott back to his master, saying you're a subspecies and you have no rights whatsoever. You are a slave. He tried to buy his freedom, by the way, and he couldn't do that. The lady who owned him would not allow him to buy his freedom. It was a tragic scene. He finally got his freedom. As an older man, he only lived 18 months a free man. In his 50s, late 50s or early 60s, he only lived a free man for 18 months. But let's move forward again. Now we're getting to the time in 1858. There was another phenomenon going on in America. Republicans were now building up a head of steam because people in America, especially northern people, began to say, this is all wrong. You can't own people. You can't deny them rights. You can't deny them the right to live the way they want. Our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence give that high moral value that God would want us to say, all men are created equal. Remember when we went up front there, I said, I'm a child of God. I got life and I've got liberty. So we have an abomination against God, not only our black brothers and sisters. So now we're moving into this thing, and we have the Lincoln-Douglas debates in Illinois. Lincoln coined a phrase there that still resonates today about a house divided against itself cannot stand. And we were moving towards an impending civil war. And when Lincoln was elected President of the United States, now, in those days, Senator Pierce, we didn't swear in presidents in January. We swore them in March. So there was quite a bit of time between the election and the swearing in of a president. During that time, everybody says, Lincoln had all these states secede. No, when Buchanan was president, 5 states already seceded from the Union before Abraham Lincoln got in. Now we had, in April of 1861, the southern states attacked the effort to resupply Fort Sumter. And at that point, America declared war on itself. Think about that term, America declared war on itself. And thus we started the Great Civil War, in which 740,000 Americans died. How many is that? Yes, Valerie? Exactly. That's 750,000 people, folks. And I will tell you this, it wasn't until the Gulf War where America suffered that many deaths since the Civil War. World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, we still didn't have that many deaths. And it was just a few years ago when we finally had enough American deaths to equal what was done in 4 years in America fighting this issue. Now, I want to go to a couple things here that Abraham Lincoln said. Those of you that know me know I'm a great student of Abraham Lincoln. I forgot one person in American history, a guy named John Brown. Anybody remember the name John Brown? John Brown was a white man. He was involved in the Kansas uprisings, along with another man that Ted had mentioned earlier, and a real true American patriot. Oops, somebody dropped something there all over the floor. An American patriot by the name of Douglas, 2 S's, and it wasn't Stephen Douglas. It was Frederick Douglass, himself a slave, and they commenced talking to each other, and unfortunately, and it was true, but it was unfortunate, that John Brown believed the only way to save America was through violence. And he tried to do that. He tried to take over the arsenal at Harper's Ferry and arm the Negroes for an armed rebellion. It didn't work. He was captured and hung. And I wanted you to all know who the officer was that captured him. It was Robert E. Lee. Himself, slaves in his family as well. So you can see we've drawn a line here that's a terrible line. And then the rest came up here. In 1862, there was a really famous speech. I've showed it to Ted, and it's just one of the most remarkable speeches, I think. Well, it was written. I shouldn't say a speech. In the day, the State of the Union addresses were not given. They were written to the Congress. And this one in 1862 was written by Abraham Lincoln and given to the Congress over the issue of slavery. Remember, we're a nation torn asunder now in a war against itself. He said, fellow citizens, and I'd like you all to listen to the phenomenal logic that Lincoln has always used. Fellow citizens, we cannot escape history. We of this Congress and this administration will be remembered in spite of ourselves. No personal significance or insignificance can spare one or another of us. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. He's talking about the Civil War. We say we are for the Union. The world will not forget that we say this. We know how to save the Union. The world knows that we do know how to save it. We, even we here, hold the power and the responsibility in giving freedom to the slave. We guarantee freedom to the free. Honorable and like in what we give and what we preserve. We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth. Other means may succeed. This cannot fail. The way is plain, peaceful, generous, just, a way of which, if followed, the world will forever applaud, and God must forever bless us. That one phrase that we hear so much, the last best hope of earth, Ronald Reagan used it, Obama used it, that was written by Abraham Lincoln, a great mind. Then in 1862, we had the Emancipation Proclamation. Earlier on in the year, Lincoln had penned this out. But the Union was losing the war, and he didn't want to make this look, so he needed a victory. And he went to the Battle of Antietam. Neither side won the Battle of Antietam, but the Union did not lose the battle. So that's when he brought this out. Battle of Antietam was one of the bloodiest 24 hours in American history. We lost 30,000 Americans in one day in a battle. Imagine that. You cannot believe the struggle. Then Abraham Lincoln gave his Gettysburg Address. You all know it. It was read here today, but there's a few things about the Gettysburg Address that are really important. We all had to learn the Gettysburg Address in school, memorize it. Many of us don't know what it means. It's an incredible document. It says so much. But it begins that we were conceived and dedicated to the principle that all men are created equal. Then he talks about the men that have fought that struggle. And he says the world will not remember what we say here, but it can never forget what we did here. And I know as a child, it always bothered me. What did they do here? They fought a battle. And they fought a battle that still goes on in the hearts and minds today. And it has gone on through every battlefield in history as a physical battle. People die, not always for principle. But they were different. And as Colonel Chamberlain said, this was a different kind of war. We did not fight for loot. We did not fight for women. We did not fight for territory. And he said, this is an army out to set other men free. And in the end, what we are fighting for is the value of human life. This is what Abraham Lincoln's talking about. And he talks about the great work that's unfinished work. And at the very end, and this is one of my favorite things because he not only says what the Civil War is about, but he gives a promise that if we free the slaves, what will happen to America, and that nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom. That's freeing black people and making them equal to any American citizen. And here's the promise: and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. Think about that. When you read that Gettysburg Address, think of it in those terms. He's talking about freeing people and promising that our country will survive forever if we do the right thing. Remember, child of God, life, liberty. You cannot have liberty if you're a slave. There is no such thing. It's a total contradiction. I'm almost done. This was Lincoln's second inaugural address, and I think Bruce read that. Somebody read that. George read it? Okay, George read it. And there are some really absolutely phenomenal statements in here, a couple of which I would like to expound upon. I don't consider myself to be an unusual person with regards to faith, but Lincoln says, both read the same Bible and pray to the same God, and each invokes his aid against the other. It may seem strange that any man should dare to ask a just God's assistance in wringing their blood from the sweat of another man's face. Let us judge not that we be judged. All prayers of both could not be answered. That of neither has been answered. My friends, the bottom line, when it's my turn to leave this earth, I want to be able to say that I was on God's side and I didn't invoke God to be on my side. That's really an important thing, that we do God's work. And I can't stress that enough. This is not a Christian thing. It's not any religion. It's just the way the Lord works. And then at the end, and he says, this is so powerful, with malice towards none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right. Let us strive to finish the work we are in. What is that work, guys? That work is freeing the slaves of the United States of America. And during that year, this happened just weeks before Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. During that year, he began the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment eliminates slavery. Now, you might say that the Emancipation Proclamation did. It did not. It only freed it in states that were in armed rebellion. Now, how did Lincoln do that? Because in time of war, the government can take property that is used for battle. And the South used the black slaves to run the farms and the plantations while the white boys served. So he considered the blacks contraband, and he could do that legally and said, you're henceforth free. But he didn't do that in other states. Didn't do it in Missouri, Kansas, Kentucky, Maryland. Why? Because they did not secede from the Union, and the United States government was actually not doing battle with those states. It's an interesting approach that Lincoln took. But now we're into the 13th Amendment, and we're going to codify freedom for everyone in America, but specifically for those people that were black slaves. And we get to the 14th Amendment. Ted's going to talk about that. And the 15th Amendment giving the right to black males to vote. Now, ladies, the 19th Amendment was yours. They corrected that error in our system, too. And our Constitution is a beautiful document because it is self-correcting. Not everything in it is correct, but it's an attempt to correct things. And I'm sure that before our country leaves the planet, that there will be other amendments that correct some of those things. So at any rate, bottom line, the Ku Klux Klan came along with a guy named Nathan Bedford Forrest. He was a Southern general, considered one of the best they had. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about Nathan Bedford Forrest, very short. Nathan Bedford Forrest, before the Civil War, was a slave auctioneer. He auctioned off slaves. And as a general in the Civil War, he was in charge of what was known as the Fort Pillow Massacre, where there were whites and blacks, and they surrendered to the Confederates, and the Confederates killed all the black soldiers, murdered them. And this is the founder of the Ku Klux Klan. At any rate, I know I've probably overstayed my time. I've got a lot more that I could talk about, and I'm not going to do that. I've got tons and tons of information. I talk all day on this. But I do thank you for your indulgence. At this point, were you going to introduce Ted, or am I going to introduce Ted, or Ted, are you going to come up here? And well, I don't know what the plan is at this point. So, at any rate, that's a bit of the history of the United States. I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope there are things here that you didn't know, and I'm pleased to help anybody afterwards. And I love American history, and I'm happy to share it. Ted, I'm honored, sir. I am honored to be on the stage with you. Oh, picture time. Everybody get your cameras out. At least Beth. I want a picture. Hey, do the Russell Pierce thing.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, let me just do this real quick. I want to, we have pizza. Okay, we've got about 10 pizzas back there. So we're going to run through this last part really quickly here. And I wanted Pastor Jackson real quick, please. And just give us your thoughts, 2 or 3 minutes here, for your thoughts of what you experienced here today. And then I'll close out with our strategy, and then we'll go get something to eat and call it a day. Sir.
To all of you that are here, this is a unique experience. Been to college, been to seminary, been told about the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. But after listening to you the first time I heard you, got educated about what I'd supposedly been taught. I want to say thank you. To all of us that are here, when I listen to you and I go back and I think about what I've learned through the years, and I was a Democrat, and then I woke up, saw the light. But what I learned through them was deceit, conceit, good lying, and false telling. We have not come as far as we could have come, Ted, had we followed our Republican forefathers. We have been denied the growth. We've been denied opportunity because we've been lied to that we're providing this for you. And we fell into the trap and accepted it. No Christian can be a part of a political party that endorses that which is against God. God is against the murder of babies. He's against same-sex marriage. You cannot make right by a Supreme Court what God in heaven says is wrong.
Thank you, Pastor. Thank you very much. Most of you have heard my dissertation on the 14th Amendment and the Civil Rights Act of 1866. How the 1866 Act was only a congressional act, and that the Republicans at the time, the architects of the law, thank you, Valerie. I remember when James Spencer first told me this, and he said, "Ted, go study it." And I went and studied, and I came back and said, "James, how come people don't know this? It's very simple. It's right here in our faces." He said, "Ted, people don't read. Those who do read, they don't comprehend what they're reading." And I understood that they had to codify the 1866 Civil Rights Act into the Constitution because they felt that a future generation of Congress would simply repeal it, and then it's over. Then we as a people, the freed slaves, would be lost. Would be nobody. And so they decided, well, we'll codify it into the Constitution by creating another amendment, which came out to be the 14th Amendment. And that way it cannot be repealed. And unfortunately, it wasn't taught enough. I had never understood. I read the 13th and 14th Amendment, but I didn't know anything about the 1866 Civil Rights Act. I mean, Russell Pierce pointed this out. John Eastman pointed this out. Chris Kobach, the Secretary of State of Kansas, pointed this out. In fact, Senator Pierce, Chris Kobach, and John Eastman and I have a collaborative on this particular issue. And this is why we wanted to speak with Donald Trump. I could care less about Donald Trump, and I wasn't even going to vote. I'd given up on the political system. I was not going to. I just re-registered about 3 weeks ago to vote. I'm not a Republican. I'm an independent. I'm declined to state what I am. I'm not even voting for Donald Trump, to be honest with you. I'm not voting for Donald Trump. And I'm going to tell you why I'm not voting for Donald Trump. I'm not voting for Donald Trump until Donald Trump meets with us. Until we really understand. Do you really understand what you're doing, Mr. Trump, about the 14th Amendment? Or are you just talking? Because if you don't understand, Mr. Pierce, now we talked about this. Russell Pierce and John Eastman and I and Chris Kobach, we talked about this when Donald Trump first announced that we wanted to meet with him privately. Because if he did not understand what he was doing with the 14th Amendment, he could mess around here and make it worse for us for whom the law was intended, and consequently be a threat to the nation. We just want to find out. And if he understood it, if he didn't understand it, we wanted to educate him on that. Right, Senator? And make sure he was clear on it. But if he did understand it, and that his strategy was, look, I don't talk about it a whole lot because I want to wait until the general election, and then when that happens, I'll come out real strong on it and will for sure win the black vote overwhelmingly. Because once we talk about this, when black people hear who we actually are in the Constitution of the United States, they are coming to the Republican Party. They'll come to that person. And maybe that was what he was doing. If that was what he was doing, then fine, Mr. Trump, we're going to leave you alone. And we will continue to doing what we are doing, and you do your thing. We'll see you on the other side of in the general election. For some other reason, we never were able to get a conversation with Mr. Trump. Now, yesterday I had a conversation with Katrina Pierce, this is a guy. And you all know Katrina Pierce. She was here before with the first conference that we had. And we talked about all of this and about this conference. And so they're going to tell Katrina's going to talk with Mr. Trump about us and what we're doing so that we can have that conversation, Senator, with him privately. Now, our strategy is this, ladies and gentlemen. We wanted to have this at the floor because it was a prestigious thing to do, and I think that's why a lot of people didn't show up, because it's not on the prestigious floor and it's a long way to travel. But our strategy was, first of all, lay this down, this conference. Then we are still going to have a workshop on the 25th of June. We already have the venue for that. Now, I'm hoping, I'm going to try, and maybe Sister McKinney and Pastor Jackson and Pastor Maupin and what's the other, Clyde Bowen, and Sister McKinney and others in the Black Lives Matter movement here locally and the folks, that we go back to Reginald Bolden, his names, go back to Reginald Bolden, and we meet with him. And Senator, if you help us with this again, if you could do it, we'll go back and meet with the speaker, Gowan, again, and with this time as well, Mr. Biggs as well, President Biggs. We start the whole process over. That's why I'm saying nobody in this. Reginald Bolden is not the bad guy. He's not a bad guy. Okay? He just didn't know. Okay? Nobody is a bad guy in this. It was a glitch. And we learned from this, right? So we want to go back to Mr. Gowan. Say, Mr. Gowan, between now, I don't know if it's possible, a lot of fast work, between now and the 25th, or maybe even after 25th in July. But before the convention, let us come back to the floor. Let us come back to the floor. And let us have this conference specifically. We'll focus on the 14th Amendment directly itself. And let us do that, sir. Now, if that happens, or if it doesn't happen, but we will do the 25th, what we will do then, we want Trump, who is the head of the party, to do this. We want the convention to focus on the matter, the most important matter to black lives, consequently all lives, is we want him to talk about the 14th Amendment. We really want him to talk about it. And we want the party to come up with a program whereby the Republican Party, for once in its existence, give a complete recital of the Republican role in chattel slavery, the Civil War, Jim Crow, Ku Klux Klan, right up to the present day. Republicans, what was your role in this? Tell us the truth. Because all these young people out here, black and white, who are hollering Black Lives Matter and carrying on about the injustice of our society, these young people and everyone needs to know what is the root of all of this. Now, when the Republicans do that on July the 18th, the whole world's going to be watching. This is mainly because of Donald Trump. The world's going to be watching. The whole world's going to be watching. And the whole world is watching about this race wound in this country. I hear it all the time. They're telling me out there, how can the United States go around telling other countries about how they're mistreating their citizens when look at what you've done to the black lives in your own country, America. Don't talk to us. We'll hear you because you got guns, you got money, but apart from that, don't talk to us. When you fix your wound in your country, your greatest wound, then you can come and talk to us, and we will obey you. We will follow you. So, the world's going to be watching, and if the Republican Party will tell the truth for once in its life, okay? Then Mr. Trump says to the Democrats, which will meet the 21st to the 25th, and they say, okay, Democrats, it is your turn. We got disrobed. We want you, Democrats, to tell us your role in chattel slavery, the Civil War, Jim Crow, Ku Klux Klan, right up to the present day. Now, the Democrats will have a choice. So that way we have both parties telling the young people and others of this country, of the world, what the history is. For the first time, people will hear it. Now, I don't think the Democrats are going to answer. I don't see how they could. I don't care what party you are, partisan-wise. Forget about the partisan politics for a minute. Let's just deal with historical fact. Who did what back then, and what were their titles, and what were their labels? If the Democrats try to answer it, they're going to be in trouble. If they don't answer it, they're going to be in trouble. Now, this is specifically for Sister McKinney. Part of our strategy in this time, and still remains, we need to bring to Phoenix, Arizona, as many of the Black Lives Matter leaders in this country as possible. Bring them here, get a hotel, wine and dine them, spend a Saturday with them. Whether they agree or disagree is irrelevant. But what we want to do is explain to these young men and women what this thing is about. Tell them what it is. And then, I believe, when they hear the truth, that they will deal with the truth. And if in Philadelphia, the Democrats refuse to do what the Republicans did in Cleveland and tell the truth, then Black Lives Matter can go to them and say, how come you're not disrobing as Republicans are? Do you have something to hide? Now, Hillary Clinton has said, and Bernie Sanders has said, Black Lives Matter, right? But yet they turn right around and they want to give the most important matter of black lives to illegal aliens who come in this country, have a baby, and say, that child's a U.S. citizen based on the 14th Amendment. Now, Black Lives Matter has to ask a question. Miss Kennedy, Miss Hillary Clinton, and Mr. Sanders, how do y'all square that? When the Black Lives Matter kids got in y'all's faces and said, does Black Lives Matter or not? And you said, well, Black Lives Matter. Okay, great. Black Lives Matter. But how does it matter when you are giving the most important matter of black lives to people who don't belong to? They can't square it. But see, now listen, folks. We win this thing. A lot of people are going to come. A lot of black folks are going to wake up. You're going to see a revival of black people in this country that you have not seen even since the days of Martin Luther King or the great Marcus Garvey. And you're going to see a change. But we have got to be ready. We have got to be ready to train and educate these folks what it actually means to be a Republican, if they're going to come in that direction, or what it is as a Democrat. We are proposing to Mr. Trump and the Republican Party that our group here in Arizona, because he came here first, he said, build a wall, stop illegal immigration, 14th Amendment, to y'all, Arizonans. So you therefore have a right to say to Mr. Trump, Republican Party, we want you to contract with us to train trainers, to have workshops and seminars all across this country for all of these people who are coming into the party who are ignorant as to what it means to be Republican and what this country is about. Because it cannot rest on your personality, Mr. Trump, or anybody else's personality, because you're going to mess up and they're going to leave the party, especially the new Democrats coming in. What you're going to have to do is people are going to have to gravitate based on the message, and it will remain that way. That's what we've got to do. Millions and millions of people. And I believe if we present that truth, while there's a lot of pain and need, people will be patient to receive the benefits from all of this. So that's kind of a basic strategy into the conventions, both of them, beyond the conventions, into the general election, and beyond. And one final thing on this business with Mr. Trump. Now, if he does it, I'll probably vote for him. I went to Ted Cruz's website. I went to Hillary Clinton's website. I went to Sanders' website. I looked for us. We were not there. But at least on Donald Trump's website, I saw us there, and he doubles down on the 14th Amendment. When he's elected, which I think he will be, I'm going to vote for him if he does meet with us and accepts this, we will have a national body politic. We'll be coordinated and organized. I'm a little afraid of Mr. Trump in that while he purports Republican Democratic ideals and work with the Congress, this man is a king. This man's an emperor. He's used to giving orders. He's used to that. And I am afraid that if we, the people, do not have a system in place to keep this president and future presidents in check, he could go rogue. If you think we had a problem with Barack Obama, we're going to have our hands full. Okay? So the reason our country is having the problems it's having, because we, the people, have not supervised our elected officials. And I think we can use Donald Trump, working with him, to train ourselves from now on, as long as this country shall exist. We, the people, as Ron said in the Declaration, we give them the consent to govern us. Therefore, if they mess up, that's our fault. Why? Because you don't hire somebody and don't supervise them. You hire somebody and don't supervise them and they mess up, that's your fault. It's our fault, we the people. So we can use this whirlwind around this man that has developed to energize ourselves for the first time in the history of our country to have an institution whereby we supervise the president, his cabinet, the Congress, and including the Supreme Court. Now, run tape back and I'm going to finish this. You guys go to the website. Go to American Unification. We are going to end this house being divided against itself. We're going to unify our country for the first time, black and white and otherwise. Go to the 14th Amendment.us. In that, it's on the program. You go to, please guys, do your homework. Don't come to a conference and get your head full of knowledge and then it all leaks out. Do your homework. I have 23 video clips that Mark and I made on the 14th Amendment. Very short. It explains what it is. Okay, check that out. Study, study, study. And we're going to be all right. Any questions? Any comments? Okay, sir. Yes. Yes. Beginning with Arizona. Yes, sir. It's the message, folks. It's the message. It's the message. We don't want to build our lives and our country around an individual or individuals. It's got to be our message. If you take a survey, most people who say that they're Republican haven't, and I would say 90% don't know what it means. 90% don't know what it means. Okay. And I'll bet you 90% of Democrats don't know their history either. They just don't know. They mean well, but it's up to us to teach them. Okay? No. No, they do not know. No, they do not know. They really don't know. Honestly, I don't think they know. I think a lot of them, they want to do the right thing. They want to care about people. They want to help people. I know a lot of Democrats. I know liberals. I know a lot of them. I used to be a liberal, so I know. Okay, don't misunderstand that either, because I will use liberal and conservative values to get the man out the ditch. I'm not a implacable person. I like Trump. I can move with things. You need to be able to move with things. So, what'd you say? Well, okay, I'm a good liberal. Okay, but a what? I have some good in me. That's good in me. God in me. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm a God supremacist. That's that type of thing. So they do care. And what we got, if we're going to unify our country, folks, we really have an American unification. We have got to stop pointing our fingers at people. We've got to stop condemning people. I heard some guys the other day on the radio, Rush Limbaugh, David Horowitz, Mark Levin, Glenn Beck, the big guns. And they were saying how bad the Democrats are, how screwed up the leftists are. They're taking our country to hell. This is a horrible, horrible thing they're doing. And I wanted to yell at the radio and say, well, duh. It's on our watch. It's happening. What the socialists are doing, that is their job. We who call ourselves, if you call yourself a Republican, now I am a Republican, not in the party, but I am a Republican. If we are Republicans, then we are the guardians of the what? Republic. If you keep it, guardians. But see, the conservatives have been using conservative values to fight this thing, and they're losing the country. Conservatives have won out of the 39 presidential elections since 1880. Conservatives under the Republican banner, name anyway, has won 21 elections, presidential elections, to the Democrats 16. In 1968, between 68 to 2012, the conservatives won 7 presidential elections to the Democrats 3. 2 by Barack Obama should have won, made 5. You have to ask the question, Centurion, why are we losing? We're winning battles, but we're losing the war. What is insanity? The same thing. The more we say conservative, 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 instead of Republican, Republican, 1854, 1856, we are losing the country. Abraham Lincoln understood the only way to save the Union was to deal with what the Union was created to do. And that's what we have to do, folks. Okay? If you're conservative, I'm a conservative. I believe in conservative values. Absolutely. But it wasn't conservative values for which those boys, those 740,000 young, innocent white boys and men and 38,000 blacks in Abraham Lincoln died for. That's the